You're not on the list, and people like you don't belong here." The words, dripping with champagne-fueled contempt, stopped Marcus Thorne at the velvet rope. The host, Charles Winthrop, placed a palm on his leather jacket, a silent command to retreat. His wife's laugh was the punctuation. 3 hours later, their world was ash, and the only man who could save what they valued most was the one they'd tried to keep out. Marcus Thorne was a 14-year veteran of Ladder Company 9, a man who ran into burning buildings when everyone else ran out. But to Charles and Eleanor Winthrop, he was just a man in a leather jacket, unworthy of their charity gala. This is the story of that night, a collision between two worlds, one of exclusive privilege, the other of sacred duty. It forces a single, devastating question. What happens when the person you judge as beneath you is the only one standing between your family and oblivion? And as the first flames flickered in the Winthrop Mansion's west wing, that question was about to be answered in fire and fate. The Winthrop Winter Gala was the social event of the season, a $200,000 fundraiser where the city's elite patted themselves on the back for their generosity. Charles Winthrop, a third-generation real estate magnate, and his wife Eleanor, a former debutante turned philanthropist, were in their element. They had curated the guest list with surgical precision. It wasn't about who gave, but who belonged. Meanwhile, across town, Marcus Thorne was finishing a 24-hour shift. He'd been invited to the gala by a grateful neighbor he'd pulled from a car wreck, a retired teacher who donated a ticket in his name. Marcus almost didn't go. But the cause, a children's hospital, meant something. He owned one suit, buried in the back of his closet. Instead, he wore what felt authentic: dark jeans, boots, and his father's old leather jacket. It was a decision that would define the entire night. He arrived at the glittering waterfront museum just as the auction began. The disparity was immediate. While Marcus looked for a place to stand quietly, Charles Winthrop noticed him. To Charles, the leather jacket wasn't an heirloom. It was a uniform of the unwanted, a signal of someone who'd wandered in from the wrong side of the velvet rope. Charles whispered to the hired security, a firm instruction. This was the unspoken policy of such events: maintain the aesthetic. And the data shows this instinct isn't unique. Studies of upscale venues confirm dress codes are often the last acceptable tool for racial and class profiling, banning items commonly worn by black patrons while allowing them for others. The confrontation was brief, brutal, and public. "The list is closed," Charles stated, not even checking. His wife Eleanor's laugh, a light, tinkling sound, was the weapon's follow-through. "Darling, really look at him." For Marcus, a man who charged into chaos for a living, the calculated coldness was a different kind of heat. He didn't argue. He just met Charles's gaze, gave a single slow nod, and turned away. The message was received. He was a prop in their play of power, a living contrast to make their charity feel grander. He drove home, the jacket feeling heavy on his shoulders. But here, where the story twists, Marcus Thorne wasn't just any firefighter. He was a decorated technician, one of fewer than 9% nationwide who are black in a profession with a deeply segregated history. He'd spent years fighting not just fires, but the quiet presumption that he didn't belong in the firehouse either. He'd proven himself in burning buildings, where merit is the only currency that matters. The slight at the gala was a return to a world where different rules applied. He pushed it aside. There were real problems to solve. He fell into a fitful sleep around midnight. At 2:17 a.m., the alarm shattered the silence at Ladder Company 9. A structure fire, a residential mansion in the prestigious Oak Heights district. Address: 241 Laurel Drive, the Winthrop residence. The crew mobilized with practiced efficiency. Marcus, now in his turnout gear, felt a cold knot form in his stomach as the address came over the radio. He knew that house. He'd just been at its gates. The response was a 5-minute blur of sirens and streetlights. As the truck rounded the corner, the scene was apocalyptic. The west wing of the sprawling Georgian mansion was fully involved, orange flames clawing at the night sky. Thick, acrid smoke poured from shattered windows. Police already had the perimeter, their faces grim. The incident commander's voice crackled. Occupants reported. 2 adults, 1 child. Last known location, second floor master suite. We have no contact. Captain Rita Shaw assigned positions. Thorne, Perez, you're on primary search. That's the focal point. Go. There was no time to think about the Gala, about the laugh, about the palm on his chest. There was only the task. Marcus and his partner, Diego Perez, hauled the hose line to the grand front entrance. The ornate double doors were locked. A firefighter's Halligan bar made short work of that. They entered a hellscape of heat and noise. The opulent foyer was filling with smoke, the crystal chandelier overhead already cracking from the heat. They made for the sweeping staircase, now a treacherous path as fire rolled across the ceiling above them. Their training took over, a duet of movement and communication. Left wall clear. Moving up, the heat was intensifying, a physical weight. They reached the second floor landing. The master suite was to the right, down a long hallway that was rapidly becoming a tunnel of flame. Visibility dropped to 0. They moved on hands and knees, following the hose line, feeling for doors. And then they heard it, faint but unmistakable, a child's cough. It came from behind a door at the end of the hall, a door marked by tendrils of smoke snaking from its frame. Perez forced it open. The room was a box of superheated gas waiting to flash. On the floor near a king-sized bed were Charles and Alina Winthrop, unconscious, overcome by smoke. Between them, curled in a small ball, was their 9-year-old daughter, Chloe. She was awake, terrified, gasping for clean air. Perez immediately moved to the parents. "I've got the 2, can you get the girl?" Marcus didn't hesitate. He scooped Chloe up, shielding her face with his coat. She clung to him, a sob muffled by his gear. "I've got you," he said, his voice firm through his mask. "I've got you." He turned to exit, the path back now a wall of roaring flame. The ceiling groaned ominously. Perez was struggling to drag both adults. They were trapped. Captain Shaw's voice was urgent in their ears. "Secondary egress. There's a balcony off that room. We have a ladder coming to the east side." Marcus spotted the French doors. He kicked them open, stumbling onto a stone balcony. The cold night air was a shock. Below, another crew was raising an aerial ladder. It clanged against the railing. "Send the child down," the firefighter below yelled. But as Marcus moved to hand Chloe over, a violent, explosive asterisk whoosh erupted from the room behind them. A backdraft. The force blew Perez off his feet and sent a fireball out the doorway, engulfing the balcony. The ladder crew shielded their faces. When the flames receded, Marcus was on his knees, his back curled around Chloe, his turnout coat smoldering. Perez was down but moving. The interior was now completely impassable. The ladder was their only way out, but it could only take one person at a time. Perez, seeing Marcus's position, made the call. "Take her, now. I'll hold for the next one." There was no argument in a moment like that. Marcus secured Chloe, stepped onto the ladder, and began the careful, agonizing descent with his precious cargo. Every step down, he could feel the heat from the raging mansion at his back. He reached the ground, passing Chloe to a waiting paramedic. She was coughing, crying, but alive. He turned immediately, looking back up at the balcony where Perez was helping a dazed, coughing Charles Winthrop onto the ladder. Alina Winthrop was next. The rescue was proceeding. A wave of relief started to wash over him. Then, a structural scream of tortured wood and metal echoed through the night. The entire central portion of the mansion's roof collapsed inward, sending a colossal plume of sparks and embers into the sky. The balcony where they just stood shuddered violently. The firefighter on the ladder with Charles Winthrop held on desperately. On the ground, Alina Winthrop, wrapped in a blanket, her face smudged with soot, stared at the firefighter who had just carried her daughter to safety. Her eyes traveled from his helmet, down his scorched turnout gear, and locked onto his face, now visible in the harsh emergency lights. Her expression of shock and gratitude froze, then shattered into something else entirely, a dawning, horrified recognition. She had just realized who had saved her child. And in that moment, as her husband was helped down the shaking ladder, the real fire was only just beginning to ignite. In the chaotic glow of the dying fire, a different kind of tension ignited. Alina Winthrop's gaze, a mix of horror and recognition, lasted only a second before she was swept into the medical tent. But that second was a spark. Paramedics checked Marcus for burns. His captain clapped him on the shoulder. "Good work, Thorne, you saved a life tonight." But Marcus's eyes were on the tent where the Winthrop family was being treated. He felt no victory, only a deep, unsettling chill. By dawn, the story was already splitting in two. The official version, crafted by a public relations firm before the sun had fully risen, was simple. Heroic firefighters saved prominent family from tragic blaze. Local news ran the headline with a photo of Chloe Winthrop wrapped in a blanket, a firefighter's helmet obscuring his face. The Winthrops, through their spokesperson, expressed eternal gratitude to the brave men and women of the fire department. But the unofficial version, the one spreading through whispers at the firehouse and texts among the Gala's staff, was more complicated. It asked a question: was that the same firefighter turned away at the door last night? A catering waiter who'd seen the whole thing posted a vague but incendiary tweet. "Crazy night. Saw a guy get dissed at the Winthrop Gala for his jacket. Hours later, same guy carrying the Winthrop kid out of a fire. Life writes the best scripts." It didn't name names, but it didn't need to. In a city of 800,000, the circles were small enough for people to connect the dots. Marcus returned to his quiet apartment exhausted in his bones. He ignored his buzzing phone. The department offered counseling, standard procedure after a traumatic rescue. He declined. He just wanted to sleep. But at 11 a.m. his lieutenant called, not for a debrief but a heads up. "Thorne, there might be some media asking about last night. The chief's office says to direct all inquiries to public affairs. Just a formality." The lieutenant's tone was careful, neutral. It was the tone of an institution bracing for impact. The impact came that afternoon. Charles Winthrop, discharged from the hospital, held a press conference on the lawn of his charred mansion. He stood before the scorched skeleton of his home, his arm around his wife. His daughter thankfully kept away. He spoke of loss, of gratitude, of rebuilding. Then a reporter from the Metro Daily, tipped off by the waiter's tweet, asked the question. "Mr. Winthrop, there's a rumor circulating that one of the firefighters who saved your family was actually a guest turned away from your gala earlier that evening for a dress code violation. Can you comment?" Charles Winthrop's face, already drawn from smoke and stress, tightened imperceptibly. He offered a weary, paternal smile. "Last night was a whirlwind of terror and confusion. Our focus, and the focus of those incredible first responders, was on saving lives, not on what anyone was wearing hours before. We trust the fire department's professionalism completely. To suggest anything else is to distract from their heroism." It was a masterclass in deflection, praising the institution to sidestep the individual, invoking professionalism to dismiss a personal slight. He made the question itself seem petty. But Alina Winthrop's reaction betrayed the script. As her husband spoke, her eyes, fixed on the middle distance, filled not with tears of gratitude but with something harder to define, a profound, unsettling shame. The camera caught it. That night the clip played on the news, the anchor's voiceover noting the emotional toll on the family. Online, people slowed down the footage. They saw her flinch at the question. They saw the look. The whisper network became a roar. Marcus watched the press conference from his couch. He saw the deflection. He saw Alina's face. He felt a familiar hardening in his chest, the same feeling he'd had walking away from the velvet rope. They weren't grateful. They were embarrassed. They were embarrassed that their savior was the man they deemed unworthy. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a number he didn't recognize. He let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text appeared. "Marcus, it's Ben from Metro Daily. Would love to get your perspective on last night's events. The public deserves to hear the full story." He deleted it. But the story was now a living thing, and it was hungry. The next day, a follow-up piece ran online. It was no longer just about the fire. The headline read, "Gatekeepers and Guardians, the Two Worlds of a City." It detailed the exclusive nature of the Winthrop Gala, its $100,000 tables, its notorious guest list. It contrasted this with the demographics of the city's fire department, noting the historical struggle for integration and the current representation figures. It didn't accuse Charles Winthrop of anything illegal. It simply laid the two worlds side by side and let the irony hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. The public reaction was a fault line. One side saw a clear-cut tale of karma and poetic justice. Memes circulated, a photoshopped image of Marcus in his jacket with the words, "You're not on the list," next to an image of him in gear with the words, "But I'm on the ladder." The other side, the side of old money and social gatekeepers, saw a dangerous narrative. They argued that dress codes were necessary, that events had standards, and that dragging a traumatized family through the mud over a minor social snub was cruel. They painted Marcus as a potential opportunist, a man who might now seek fame or a payout. The pressure began to crystallize within the institutions. The fire department's public affairs office was flooded. The chief, a political creature who played golf with Charles Winthrop at the very country clubs that had no black members, faced a dilemma. His department was being praised, but for a reason that made powerful people uncomfortable. He called Marcus into his office. It wasn't Captain Shaw this time. It was the chief himself. The office was paneled in dark wood, awards lining the walls. The chief didn't sit behind his desk. He perched on its edge, a pose of forced camaraderie. "Thorne, hell of a job the other night. Really, you made us all proud." Marcus waited. He knew this wasn't about praise. This media thing, though, it's becoming a distraction for the department, for the Winthrop family as they try to heal. "My phone is ringing." He paused, choosing his words like stepping stones across a river. "The best thing for everyone, I think, is to let the heroism stand on its own, without the additional context." Marcus understood perfectly. They wanted him to be a silent symbol, a faceless hero. The narrative of the brave firefighter was clean. The narrative of the brave firefighter who was snubbed by the people he saved was messy. It questioned power. It made people squirm. "Are you asking me not to speak to the press, Chief?" Marcus asked, his voice level. "I'm advising you," the chief said, the friendly tone hardening at the edges. "For your own well-being and for the cohesion of this department. These stories can take on a life of their own. They can distort facts. You're a firefighter, Thorne, not a politician. Let's keep the focus on the job." It was an order wrapped in concern, a warning. The message was clear: stand down. Let the privileged version of events become the truth. Meanwhile, in a rented penthouse while their mansion was assessed, Charles Winthrop was on a different phone call, not with the chief but with the family's legal counsel. "We need to get ahead of this," Charles said, his voice low. "The narrative is focusing on the wrong thing, on us asterisk. We need to pivot the conversation." His lawyer, a woman named Claudia Vance who specialized in reputation management, had a proposal. "Philanthropy," she said. "A generous, public donation to the fire department's foundation, in the name of the men who saved Chloe. It's positive, it's forward-looking, and it subtly reframes the relationship from one of conflict to one of mutual respect and gratitude. It makes any further discussion of the Gala incident seem like dwelling in bad faith." Charles agreed. A donation of $250,000 was announced 2 days later. The press release was effusive in its praise for the department's bravery. It mentioned no names of individual firefighters. It was a blanket of money meant to smother the story. The chief publicly and gratefully accepted the check at a photo op. The narrative machinery was trying to grind the complexity into a simple, palatable dust. Tragic accident, heroic rescue, generous thanks. The end. But Marcus Thorne was not a man who could be easily smoothed over, and he was not alone. At the firehouse, his crew had his back. Diego Perez, who'd been in the hallway with him, was furious. "They're trying to buy his silence," he fumed to the others. "They're trying to pay to make their embarrassment go away." The brotherhood of the firehouse, forged in literal fire, recognized a different kind of threat. They saw one of their own being told to swallow an insult for the sake of political comfort. And then a new piece of information surfaced, changing everything. The fire marshal's preliminary report was completed. The cause of the blaze was not faulty wiring or a forgotten candle. It was determined to be accidental, involving a malfunction in the home's newly installed, high-end gas fireplace in the master suite. But a footnote in the report, leaked to an investigative reporter, revealed a crucial detail. That specific fireplace model, the Emberglow Marquis, was the subject of a little-known, ongoing lawsuit. A class-action suit alleged a defect in the ventilation sensor that could cause it to overheat and ignite surrounding materials. The lawsuit had been stalled in court for 18 months, buried by the manufacturer's expensive legal team. Charles Winthrop's real estate firm had used the same Emberglow Marquis fireplace in several of its luxury developments. He had even been featured in a trade magazine praising its elegance and safety features. The reporter, digging further, found that Charles had received a substantial discount on the unit for his own home as part of a brand ambassador agreement. The story was no longer just about a dress code and a rescue. It was now about potential negligence, about closed-door deals, and about a dangerous product in the homes of the wealthy who believed their money insulated them from consequence. The reporter, a woman named Anya Sharma, called Marcus. This time he listened. "Firefighter Thorne," she said, "this isn't about the gala anymore. This is about the fire itself. The Winthrops aren't just victims of a random accident. They may have been victims of a product they helped promote, and the public needs to know if their influence kept a known danger quiet. Your act of heroism that night may have saved them from a disaster they had a hand in creating. I think you deserve to know what you really ran into." Marcus sat in his silent apartment, the city lights twinkling outside. He had thought the conflict was about social slights and bruised egos. Now it was about lies that could burn houses down. Anya Sharma sent him the court documents from the class action suit. He read the technical descriptions of the malfunction, the list of other minor incidents that had been settled quietly. He thought of the violent asterisk whoosh of the backdraft, the heat that had scorched his coat. He had risked his life in a fire with a cause that was not so simple. The chief had told him to be quiet. The Winthrops had tried to pay for a new narrative, but the truth, it seemed, was still smoldering beneath the surface, waiting for oxygen. And Marcus realized he could no longer just walk away. He had to decide whether to fan those flames. He called Anya Sharma back. His decision wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. If he was going to risk his life, he deserved to know the truth about the fire he was running into. They met at a diner away from downtown. Anya laid it out. The class action suit against Emberglow involved 7 families. Their claims were nearly identical. A sudden, violent overheating event originating in the fireplace's ventilation unit, resulting in property damage. In 2 cases, there were minor injuries. The manufacturer's defense was that the homeowners had failed to maintain the units properly. But internal company emails, obtained by the plaintiff's lawyers, told a different story. Engineers had flagged the sensor design as potentially unstable under continuous high heat over a year before the Winthrop fire. "And here, where Charles Winthrop comes in," Anya said, sliding a document across the table. It was a promotional contract. Winthrop Development had agreed to install Emberglow Marquis fireplaces as a standard luxury feature in their heritage collection of townhomes. In exchange, Emberglow provided them at a 70% discount and paid Winthrop a marketing fee. Charles had personally signed off as a brand advocate. When the first complaints about the fireplaces started, Anya continued, the lawsuit alleges Emberglow reached out to their biggest advocates, including Winthrop, to manage the narrative and provide supportive testimony about the product's safety. That's legalese for asking them to help cover it up. Marcus felt the pieces click into a horrifying whole. The fire in his own home wasn't just bad luck. It was a predictable failure of a product Charles Winthrop had endorsed, a product that might be in dozens of other homes. His act of heroism wasn't just saving a family from a random accident. It was saving them from the consequences of a choice they had made. The $250,000 donation to the fire department now looked less like gratitude and more like a strategic silence purchase, a way to keep the department and him friendly and quiet. Anya's story went live 2 days later. It was meticulously sourced, linking the technical report of the Winthrop fire to the lawsuit, and the lawsuit to Charles Winthrop's business dealings. It did not sensationalize the Gala incident, but mentioned it as a stark contrast in character, the man policing a door based on appearances, while potentially ignoring a danger lurking behind his own walls. The public reaction was nuclear. The narrative of the tragic, grateful family evaporated. It was replaced by one of negligence, hypocrisy, and cover-up. Charles Winthrop's lawyers swung into damage control mode, but this time their moves only dug the hole deeper. They issued a statement calling the article defamatory speculation, insisting Charles had full confidence in Emberglow's products and was heartbroken for all victims of fire, including his own family. They emphasized that the lawsuit was unproven allegations. But the statement had a critical flaw. It did not deny the existence of the promotional contract. It did not deny that Charles knew about the lawsuit before the fire. This omission was a chink in the armor. Anya and other reporters hammered it. Did you or your company have knowledge of safety concerns regarding the Emberglow marquee prior to the fire at your home? Reporters shouted the question at Charles as he left his lawyer's office. He didn't answer. His silence was louder than any denial. Then the dominoes began to fall. The city's building safety department announced it would audit all installations of the Emberglow marquee, starting with Winthrop Development Properties. Homeowners, associations in Winthrop's luxury complexes demanded immediate inspections. The value of the Heritage Collection townhomes, once a status symbol, began to plummet. The financial stakes for Charles Winthrop were no longer about reputation, they were about survival. But the backlash wasn't limited to Charles. It surged back into the fire department. The chief's earlier advice to Marcus now looked suspicious. Why was the department's leadership so eager to quiet the firefighter who had stumbled upon this connection? Whose interests were they protecting? An editorial asked the blunt question: is our fire chief more loyal to the people he serves or to the powerful donors he golfs with? The chief's photo op accepting the Winthrop donation was replayed constantly, the grateful handshake looking more like a transaction. Internal pressure within the firehouse became unbearable. The rank and file were solidly behind Marcus. They saw a brother being hung out to dry for doing the right thing, but the upper command structure was circling the wagons. Marcus was called into another meeting, this time with the deputy chief and a union representative. The tone was colder, more formal. "Firefighter Thorne, your public comments have created a conflict of interest for this department," the deputy chief stated. "I haven't made any public comments," Marcus corrected calmly. "Your cooperation with a media outlet leading to a story that impugns a major donor to the department's foundation creates the appearance of a conflict," the deputy chief clarified, his words legalistic and tight. "Effective immediately, you are placed on administrative leave, pending an internal review of your conduct and your adherence to department media policy." It was a suspension, a punitive one. They were benching him for telling the truth. The union rep, a gruff veteran named O'Malley, objected strenuously, but the decision was made. Marcus was to turn in his gear and badge. As he walked out of headquarters, the message was sent to every firefighter in the city: challenge the relationship with power and you will be removed. This backfired spectacularly. The news of Marcus's suspension broke within the hour. The public saw it for what it was: retaliation. A petition demanding his reinstatement gathered 50,000 signatures in a day. Fellow firefighters, in an unprecedented move, began giving interviews in solidarity, their faces obscured, their voices modulated. "He's being punished for having eyes," one said. "He saw what we all see every day, that some people's lives are worth more attention than others, even when they're wrong." The story had now metastasized from a personal slight into a full-blown institutional crisis. It was about safety standards, corporate accountability, political influence, and now, workers' rights. Marcus, sitting at home on forced leave, felt trapped in the eye of a hurricane he never asked for. Then Eleanor Winthrop broke. It happened quietly. She left the rented penthouse alone and went to a small park near the children's hospital her gala had been meant to benefit. A reporter from a national magazine who had been pursuing her for a profile found her there. Alina didn't give an interview, but she said one thing on the record looking at the hospital building. "I can't look at my daughter without seeing his face. I hear her laugh and I hear my own." That night at the door, "I thought we were protecting something beautiful. I see now we were just protecting something empty." It was a confession of profound guilt, and it was aimed squarely at her own actions, not the fireplace. Her statement shattered the united front the Winthrops had presented. Charles was furious, his lawyers scrambling to claim she was under duress. But the dam had cracked. The crack widened the next morning. An anonymous package arrived at Anya Sharma's office. It contained internal Winthrop development emails from the past year. One chain in particular was a bombshell. It was between Charles and his head of construction. Subject line: Emberglow client concerns. The construction manager wrote, "Another homeowner in the Bristol Heights project is complaining about soot and overheating. Emberglow is telling us it's a cleaning issue, but it's the fourth unit. We should consider pausing installations until they resolve this." Charles's reply, sent 3 months before his own house burned down, was terse. "Handle it. The margins on the marquee feature are a key selling point. Do not cause alarm. Address each complaint individually, quietly." The email was a smoking gun. It proved prior knowledge of recurring problems. It proved a conscious decision to prioritize profit over precaution. It proved the cover-up. Anya published the email verbatim. This was no longer about appearances or donations or hurt feelings. This was evidence of reckless endangerment. The district attorney's office, which had been monitoring the media storm, now had no choice. They announced the opening of a criminal investigation into potential reckless endangerment and fraud by Winthrop Development. Charles Winthrop was served with a subpoena for all company communications regarding Emberglow. His legal team shifted from defense to damage limitation, beginning plea negotiations. And in the midst of this legal tsunami, a single, focused beam of attention turned back to the fire department's leadership. The city council called for hearings. Why was a firefighter suspended for uncovering information critical to public safety? Who in the department had communications with Charles Winthrop prior to the donation? The chief was subpoenaed to testify. His political armor, once so polished, was now pitted and cracked. Marcus watched all this unfold from a distance, a strange sense of detachment settling over him. He had wanted the truth about the fire. He had gotten it, and it had unleashed forces that toppled careers and threatened empires. But he was still the man on leave, the man who had lost the job he loved for the crime of seeing clearly. Then he received a different kind of call. It was from the law firm representing the plaintiffs in the class action suit against Emberglow. They had a request. "Firefighter Thorne," the lead attorney said, "your testimony is unique. You are the first responder who witnessed the failure of this product in a way that nearly cost lives. Your professional assessment of the fire's behavior is crucial. We are expanding our suit to include Winthrop Development as a co-defendant, alleging they knowingly installed a defective product. Will you testify as an expert witness?" It was an entirely new battlefield. This wasn't the court of public opinion or the department's internal politics. This was a court of law. His word, his expertise, could help hold both the manufacturer and the developer accountable. It could force changes that might prevent the next fire. But it would also mean publicly, legally, aligning himself against Charles Winthrop, and by extension, against the department leadership that had tried to silence him. It was the point of no return. He thought of Chloe Winthrop's weight in his arms, her trust as he carried her down the ladder. He thought of the email choosing margins over safety. He thought of his suspended badge sitting in a drawer. The path forward was clear, but it led through a final, decisive confrontation. Not with fire, but with the machinery that had allowed the danger to exist in the first place. He took a deep breath and gave the lawyer his answer. The courtroom was not a grand, cinematic space, but a functional, fluorescent-lit box. But the stakes within it were monumental. Marcus Thorne, wearing his only suit, took the stand as an expert witness for the plaintiffs. He was not there as the offended guest or the heroic rescuer. He was there as Firefighter Thorne, a technician of combustion and catastrophe. He described the fire's behavior with clinical precision. The rapid, intense spread from a single point of origin, the telltale signs of a ventilation-driven flashover, the specific burn patterns consistent with a contained fuel source overheating catastrophically. His testimony was quiet, factual, and devastating. He connected the dots between the technical reports from other incidents and what he saw with his own eyes. When the defense attorney for Emberglow tried to suggest improper firefighting techniques might have worsened the blaze, Marcus calmly dismantled the argument, citing national standards and his team's textbook response. His credibility was unassailable. The combined weight of the internal emails, the engineering reports, and Marcus's first-hand account was too much. Facing the prospect of a public trial and even more damning revelations, Emberglow settled the class action suit for $175 million. But the more significant outcome was a federal recall of every Emberglow marquee unit installed in the country. An estimated 12,000 fireplaces were ripped out of walls, a direct result of the fire that had started in the Winthrop mansion. Charles Winthrop, isolated and with his legal bills mounting, saw the walls closing in. The criminal investigation into reckless endangerment was proceeding. His business partners were fleeing. To avoid a trial, he accepted a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to a single felony count of fraudulent business practices related to concealing the known defects. He was sentenced to 3 years of probation, 1,000 hours of community service, and a $500,000 personal fine. Winthrop Development was dissolved under a mountain of civil judgments and mandatory remediation costs. The empire built on exclusivity and influence was reduced to ashes far more completely than his home had been. The fallout reached the fire department's brass. The city council's hearings were brutal. The chief, under oath, was forced to admit he had spoken with Charles Winthrop shortly before the donation was announced, and that the subject of managing the public narrative had come up. He claimed he was only concerned for his department's image, but the optics were fatal. He resigned to pursue other opportunities 2 weeks later. His deputy, who had signed Marcus's suspension order, was reassigned. The administrative leave against Marcus was rescinded, deemed improper and retaliatory. He was offered back pay and reinstatement with full honors, but the offer came with an unspoken expectation to let bygones be bygones, to return to the firehouse and let the reformed department move on. Marcus did return to Ladder Company 9. The welcome was thunderous, a locker room celebration of a brother who had stood his ground, but something had shifted in him. The firehouse was still his home, but he saw the broader landscape now. He had seen how systems protected themselves, how silence was currency. He couldn't unsee it. He was offered a promotion to a public safety educator role, a desk job with influence. He surprised everyone by turning it down. Instead, with the support of the firefighters' union, he proposed a new position, community liaison and safety advocate. His role would be to bridge the gap between the department and the neighborhoods it served, particularly those historically underserved or mistrustful. He would audit building safety and affordable housing complexes, lead community workshops on fire prevention, and serve as an independent conduit for concerns. The department, eager to rehabilitate its image, approved it. Marcus's new office wasn't in headquarters. It was in a storefront in a neighborhood that rarely saw a firefighter except when something was already burning. Eleanor Winthrop divorced Charles a year after the plea deal. The public reason was irreconcilable differences, but those who knew them said the Gala, the fire, and the cover-up had hollowed out whatever foundation their marriage had. She moved with Chloe to a smaller city, away from the social spotlight that had become a glare. She volunteered, quietly, at a shelter for families displaced by house fires. She never spoke to the media again. But the story had one final poignant twist, one that brought the entire saga full circle. 5 years after the fire, the children's hospital that had been the beneficiary of the Winthrop Gala was opening a new wing. A substantial, anonymous donation had funded a state-of-the-art pediatric burn unit. The press speculated, but the donor remained a secret. At the dedication ceremony, the hospital director made a brief, unusual acknowledgement. This unit exists because of a lesson learned in the most painful way possible. That help can come from anywhere, often from those we least expect to give it. We are honored to name this the Chloe Wing, in recognition of a child's survival and the enduring hope it represents. Only a handful of people noticed the man standing at the very back of the crowd during the ribbon cutting. He was not in a suit or turnout gear, but a simple leather jacket. Marcus Thorne watched as the doors to the new wing opened. He had known about the donation because he had helped facilitate it. The money came from the remainder of the redirected Winthrop Family Charitable Fund, a condition Alina had insisted upon in the divorce settlement. It was her final, private act of restitution. Marcus had connected her lawyers with the hospital, ensuring the funds were used for something unequivocally good. He never spoke to her and she never spoke to him. But in that act, the debt, the guilt, and the gratitude were finally laid to rest. Marcus left the ceremony before it ended. He drove back to his community liaison office. There was a stack of building inspection requests waiting on his desk, and a group of tenants from a low-income high-rise were coming in that afternoon to talk about faulty fire alarms. The work was unglamorous. It was about prevention, not glory. It was about ensuring no family, in any neighborhood, ever had to rely on a miraculous rescue because their warnings had been ignored. He hung his leather jacket on the back of his chair and got to work. The world of velvet ropes and charity galas felt like a distant, strange dream. The world of burning buildings was his past. This, now, the slow, stubborn work of building something safer, something fairer, this was his present. And for the first time since that fateful night, the weight on his shoulders felt not like a burden, but like a purpose. The story that began with a rejection at a door had ended not with a dramatic victory, but with a quiet, continuous commitment. The hook was set, the tension resolved, but the real work, as always, was just beginning. So what do we make of a story like this? On one level, it's a stark parable about judgment. A man was assessed in an instant based on a jacket, on an idea of who belonged, and that assessment was catastrophically wrong. It reveals the fragility of the gates we build, whether they're velvet ropes or social codes, and how utterly meaningless they become when real crisis hits. The person deemed unworthy turned out to be the only one equipped to handle the emergency that privilege could not avert. But on a deeper level, this story is about two different kinds of fire. The obvious one, the one that consumes wood and plaster, and the slow-burning, invisible one, the fire of negligence, of putting profit before safety, of using influence to smolder truth instead of addressing its heat. Marcus Thorne didn't just battle the first fire, he ultimately helped expose the second. And in doing so, he challenged a system that often asks the people it undervalues to clean up the messes it creates. The data we touched on at the beginning isn't just background. It's the kindling, the underrepresentation in firehouses, the dress codes used as proxies for exclusion. These aren't abstract statistics. They are the conditions that make a moment like the one at the gala not an anomaly, but a predictable event. They set the stage for the shocking irony that makes the story resonate, because it feels true. It feels like a distillation of a much larger, ongoing friction in our society. The lasting question isn't whether Charles Winthrop got what he deserved. It's whether we recognize the smaller, daily versions of that gatekeeping in our own worlds. Who do we instinctively believe belongs in which space? Whose expertise do we discount based on its packaging? And what hidden dangers are we ignoring because the people warning us don't look the part? Marcus Thorne's journey from the rejected guest to the rescuer to the community advocate maps a path from reaction to purpose. It suggests that real change isn't just about calling out a single act of hypocrisy, but about the long, unglamorous work of building something better in the space that hypocrisy leaves behind. He used the spotlight forced upon him not for fame, but to illuminate a safer path for others. The fire at the Winthrop mansion is out. The lawsuits are settled. The news cycle has long since moved on. But the embers of this story continue to glow, asking us to look past the surface, to question our gates, and to remember that heroes rarely announce themselves with polished appearances. They're often the ones we overlook, until the moment we desperately need them to see us. If you found this exploration of consequence and character compelling, leave a like to support this channel. And subscribe, because tomorrow's story is another you won't want to miss. Until then, take care.